Facebook live stream to begin. I think it has begun. It's April the 5th, 2019. This is 508, a show about Worcester. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss the Worcester School Committee. I am Mike Benedetti. Here on the show with me today is Brendan Malikan.
Mike, you know what I'd like to discuss once again, you and Gabby did the same thing, where it's as soon as Gabby's ready to start telling you, give us like countdowns and whatnot, that's when you put your headphones on and you look straight down, so you miss the entire... all of us were just sitting here together staring at you because she'd already done the countdown, and you're just staring at your stack of papers, and it's hilarious. It gets more hilarious every week.
It's a moment of quiet.
I'm bringing in road flares next week, and we're just going to start throwing out road flares onto the ground every time it's time for you to start talking.
Our guest today is Grace Sliwoski of the Regional Environmental Council, talking about Earth Day 2019.
Indeed. So, am I to understand I don't have to wear these?
I choose not to. Just that way, hear everything that's happening in the room. Ninjas break in and attack us. We'll be the first to know. Mike's going to be staring at that stack of paper. He'll see them on the camera with a 10-second delay right after they take out his head. You and I will be fine.
There's a lot of volunteer news that we could talk about this week. First, next weekend is the big Working for Worcester volunteer event, which will see college students do big projects at 23 sites like schools and parks. For one thing, they're doing some improvements to the Fatty Jenkins basketball court on Fremont Street. Finally. Yeah, it's a good event.
It's probably one of the
you're an admirer of this event.
I am an admirer from afar.
This mic is blocking your face.
I am, this mic? I'll move that mic. Face isn't. You get the handsome face, Mike. It's okay. It's a great event. Primarily because I think it was one of the founders of it, Jeff Rapucci, great kid that I came to meet after he graduated Holy Cross, and also equally sad when he left the area not too long ago. But I mean, he was one of the brain trusts between that and then the ever full of energy Tim Garvin, Worcester's Energizer Bunny. Yes. And the two of them combining forces on that and mobilizing a group of humans that I think most Worcester residents like to still pretend don't engage with the city hall. But you got like thousands of them all out at once doing the stuff that most of us locals are too lazy to do throughout the course of the year, or just assume that somebody else is going to do for us.
That's who's going to do it.
Yeah,
they're the ones. Yeah, thanks for picking up my slack.
Not to immediately pull focus to REC, which I'm going to try to do over the course of the next hour, but we're actually hosting one of the Working for Worcester sites for the first time this year at the Benefit Street Community Garden, which is a really cool community garden that I would encourage folks to check out. It's a lot of gardeners who are Nepali and from Bhutan. They're doing some really cool gardening techniques, but it gets trashed pretty frequently. So Working for Worcester is going to come in, help us with a cleanup. We're building some picnic tables, putting in raised beds, and we're working with the Maine South CDC on that. So
fantastic.
Come by.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny that you should mention Nepal, because in old traditions they speak of holy mountains. The Meru Mountain of India, Mount Kunlun of the Taoists, the Karakoram of the Himalaya, the Mountain of the Philosophers, the Rosicrucian Mountain, the Kabbalistic mountains of San Juan de la Cruz. There are many other holy mountains. The legend is always the same. 9 immortal men and women live on top of the mountain. From the highest peak, they direct our world. Their counsel holds the secret to the conquest of death and the regional environment. They are more than 40,000 years old, but they were once like ourselves. If others have succeeded in conquering death, why must we accept it? I know where the Immortals live and how to obtain their secret. In this ancient Rosicrucian manuscript, I found an etching of the 9 Immortals and the place where they live. Their mountain is Wachusett, and their name is the Regional Environmental Council. And today on the show, we're lucky to have one of the 9, Grace Sliwoski, to talk about Earth Day. Hi,
welcome.
Grace.
Wow.
That's pretty well done.
Grace, I just love the name Regional Environmental Council. I always think about that scary dudes with hoods or something controlling the regional environment. Cloaks.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a total misnomer. We're not regional. We primarily serve only the city of Worcester.
Don't tell anyone that.
Our focus has shifted to food, and we don't operate as a council anymore. So we tend to go by REC,
like
but I have fun explaining it.
You're not holy, you're not Roman, you're not an empire.
Yeah, I just learned about one of our new school garden partners is the Massachusetts Collaborative.
Okay.
And they're literally called the Collaborative, which I thought was...
That's even more badass than the Regional Environmental
Yeah,
Council.
super mysterious and intriguing. We were intrigued.
Grace, what's the plan for Earth Day?
So REC has been coordinating Earth Day cleanups in the city of Worcester. This is our 30th anniversary, which is pretty cool. They don't happen on the actual day of Earth Day. We do it in partnership with the Department of Public Works and Parks. So we have to pick a Saturday that's not Patriots Day weekend, where they can work with us to pick up the trash on the day of. We don't want to leave it in the street and have more dumping. But basically the way it works is community members, nonprofits, really anyone can sign up to coordinate a site. It could be as small as a block. It could be as big as like a public park. People sort of vary in their ambition and scope. And they register it with us, and we're able to provide trash bags, gloves. We do a little training at our Earth Day Coordinators Dinner on how to dispose of needles, looking at bulk waste, electronics, stuff like that. And we work with our partners for that event, including the Department of Public Works and Park, to be able to pick up all the trash. Casella Waste Management is a big partner. They provide some dumpsters for the event. And so last year, volunteers mobilized at 70 sites. This year, we're already at 72.
Nice.
So we're really excited. I know Mike has worked on the mustard seed cleanup for many years.
I have.
Yeah, one of our favorites.
You know, that neighborhood especially, I think that right adjacent to the mustard seed cleanup region is going to be the Worcester Common Ground, like 2 blocks of cleanup, and adjacent to that I think is the My Household, 2 blocks of cleanup. So I feel like this whole side of Crown Hill is going to get cleaned up.
Oh yeah, and that's the way to do it. I mean, near the Youth Grow Farm, we'll have a cleanup on Oriad Street for the Youth Grow Farm, but Christian Community Church usually does a cleanup on Benefit, which is really close. Joe usually coordinates a cleanup in the Castle Street Park, Castle Street neighborhood. So lots of little cleanups clustered together make a big impact.
And so what's new this year? Sounds like more events, more locations than in the past.
Yeah, we're really pushing ourselves to get as many sites as possible. The target is 100.
Wow.
So I picked it because it's a nice round number.
Sure.
We're also collaborating with the YMCA for a post-event celebration. We've done that before in Castle Park. We're moving it to the Fuller Family Park this year, and they're giving us a bouncy house.
I have to say I support this because in the past, the barbecue involves walking up a tall hill, and now it is basically on a level area from my elevation perspective. And at the end of a hard morning, 4 hours of picking up trash, I don't want to walk up that hill.
Yeah, well,
I'll do it, but I don't want to.
We love Castle Park. I love Castle Park, but I will tell you, as someone who carried the grill up that hill, I feel the same.
Awesome. How did you? Do you want to ask any questions about this?
I've got nothing.
How did you get involved in? The REC?
That's a great question. So I graduated college in 2010, and probably around January started experiencing the "what am I going to do with my life?" existential panic.
Okay.
And my brother had done a teaching fellowship AmeriCorps program, and so I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. So I had applied for that along with Teach for America, nativity schools, lots of different teaching jobs. I took one class in education, so I felt pretty prepared.
What was your major?
Art history.
Nice.
Really prepared. But I ended up doing a site visit in the Bronx Public Schools, which is where I would have been placed, and had, fortunately, I think a realization that I was not prepared.
Your brother was all about the Bronx Public Schools.
He was, and he had that white male confidence, so he went and did it.
He was also like 18 feet tall.
Yeah, that's true. But no, I sort of had a second, deeper crisis of being like, no, not this, but what? And I was working at the Center for the Study of Ethnicity and Race at Columbia, which is a small, not yet department, and one of the professors there taught me how to use Idealist, which was very cool.
Okay.
And so I found postings for the Massachusetts Promise Fellowship, which is an AmeriCorps program in Massachusetts. It's specifically doing youth work, but it's based out of Northeastern, so they provide a lot more training, a lot of support. You get free grad classes. It's great. Everyone should go for it. And I applied for every single open position they had, at least 20. I didn't modify my cover letter that much. I mistakenly misgendered Casey Burns, the then director of programs, as a man, and then I sent her a very apologetic email being like, I just talked to my mom and she said you were a woman.
Casey's laid back, though.
So I think I distinguished myself in that way. And then, I will say, so the RC was one of the places that called me back for an interview, and my boyfriend at the time, now husband, was in Worcester, so that was a little bit of extra motivation. But I think, being totally honest, I didn't have any background in food systems work. I did know I wanted to work with young people, so I had done that in college. So I came to the REC, wanted to work with young people, and I discovered my passion for food systems work after I started.
And what's your role at the REC these days?
My current role is the director of programs, so
Okay.
I oversee all the staff that do the work.
But you're not the executive director.
I'm not the
You just do all
executive
the work.
director.
That's a great.
I didn't say I do all the work. I oversee the
The
people,
people
who do all the work.
All right, great.
I support them and comfort them.
Did you still don't have any questions?
No, this is going just smashingly without me.
Yeah,
Like,
how do you feel like? So you're a Worcester native.
I am.
How do you feel like Worcester is going these days? I mean, you were like born in Worcester. You grew up in Worcester. You left to go to college, but then you came back. Your kids are born in Worcester.
Yeah, I love Worcester. I've always loved Worcester. Even when I was in school, I was living in Manhattan. I was always super psyched to come back for every break. I worked at the bean counter in high school and college. Had a pretty strong crew of friends here in Worcester that are still a pretty strong crew of friends. So I've always felt really connected to Worcester. And it's been super interesting in my current role because I feel like I've gotten to know the city in a different way that I didn't in high school and college. And I think Worcester is in great shape. I think a lot of exciting and awesome things are happening. I think a lot of things are happening that aren't so awesome, but people have an eye on it. People are working on it. Yeah, I feel really good about planting here. I bought a house, so I'm sticking around.
Yeah. Anything else, Brendan?
this is still going wonderful. I
I
want to
think-
see how long you can get this going without a break. Mike.
It is. Well, I wanted to move over to economic development news.
Oh,
And
boy.
Grace, you should just mention Earth Day.
Oh, yeah.
At arbitrary intervals.
April 27th. There's still time to register to be a site coordinator.
Can I ask a kind of
yeah.
a silly question? Do most places not have Earth Day on actual Earth Day? I imagine it wouldn't make sense most of the time since it's going to fall midweek and your volunteers are going to be shy. But like,
People do Earth Day events. I think the whole week of Earth Day is pretty
Okay.
typical. Worcester State's had like an Earth Day week. We're actually working with Clark Street School. They're planning an Earth Day
Yeah.
all school event on actual Earth Day. I think it's usually like within a week.
Okay.
It's pretty common. The Ecotarium's having an Earth Day event on Friday, April 19th.
Okay.
The REC Mobile Market Veggie Mobile will be there. But yeah,
I was just thinking in the context of Pride, where like I still have never really gotten a fully straight answer from anybody as to like why Worcester Pride is like the opposite time of the year of actual Pride.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm just wondering if maybe it's something that like quietly one of these non-councils is like whoever is like pulling all the strings, the puppet masters in Worcester,
The regional.
Well,
are just trying
I
to
will say
confuse
for-
everybody by like pushing all of our holidays in the opposite direction.
I think something that a lot of people don't know is in choosing dates for events like the REC Earth Day cleanups, there are a lot of external considerations.
Tons, especially this time of
Yeah.
year. Yeah.
So we were on the fence this year between going the first weekend in April,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we did last year, or the last weekend in April, which unfortunately coincides with Greek Orthodox Easter, which
Yep.
is something we're trying to avoid. But last year we got so much negative feedback that it was so cold.
Mm-hmm.
So that was why we ended up making that call. But also, folks don't think about necessarily that we're trying to schedule on Patriots Day, and
Yep.
we also don't want to overlap with working for Worcester.
Yeah, no, I totally get you. Like,
Yeah.
I was curious. There's something going on
Yeah.
there. Or Worcester, we can't. Do
I'm
all-
sure there's an equally boring explanation
Yeah.
for Worcester Pride.
I mean, I don't even want to. I don't want to dwell on this, but I just want to mention this because we haven't talked about this in a while. Like, I sort of would like one election issue in the coming election to be the question of Worcester Pride, not the gay event, but like just Pride of Worcester, to be like, let's just have our St. Patrick's Day parade on the day proximate to St. Patrick's Day, because you know what, we don't have to worry about Boston, man.
Yeah.
We're our own thing, and also like let's acknowledge, as we've said many times, that we're in New England. It's been a snowy part of the world for thousands of years. It's going to continue to be snowy, and we just need to get over this thing with snow days
Yeah.
and stop having them. And we need to build a society, not a post-snow day society, but a post-snow day paranoia society, and do what we have to do to say, whatever it is, school's going to be during the summer, not during the winter. Whatever we feel like we have to do so that we don't have to disrupt school, we don't have to disrupt businesses. We just gotta outgrow it.
Yeah,
can do it with you.
Mike, you had me for the first half, but I am totally in opposition to you on the no snow days.
You just like the Christmas-like nature of snow days? Or
I
you
like the gift of an unexpected day off. I think it's a beautiful
Yeah,
thing.
but now that's the problem though, is they're not unexpected anymore. At night, like every night before
every
a
day.
snowstorm, like all winter long, my son is telling, yeah, we're not going to have school tomorrow. It's like, you don't know that. That's not how it works. They have to wait for like NOAA to report in. They talk to the highway department, and then within 15 minutes, like the automated, voicemails are coming in from the superintendent, and some ridiculous broken Worcester accent that I can't understand.
We just need to announce snow days in a more...
Google Translate doesn't understand Worcester accent, so like I just assume that there's no school. My son hasn't actually gone to school this winter because I just keep getting these unintelligible messages from school officials who are saying something that I can't understand.
Well, how would you feel if the way snow days were announced were more magical and surprising?
Like a lottery.
Yeah.
It's just random. Like, we're going to have, what's the number? I think we can have 5 before we start extending into the summer.
Okay.
Let's just roll the dice, and we're going to have, out of a hat, we're going to have, it could be a beautiful day, it could be 15 feet of snow, doesn't matter. We're just going to randomly select days. That's your snow day. Has nothing to do with the weather. We're just going to call it a snow day for the same reason we're going to call it Earth Day, even though it's not. And we're going to call it Worcester Pride, even though it's not.
My little brother used
and we're going to call it St. Patrick's Day, even though it's not. It's going to be a snow day.
My little brother used to have a shirt in high school that said, "Every day is Earth Day," Brendan. And actually, that was always a fun way I would irritate him, is I would be like, "Hey, Mark, guess what today is?" And he'd be like, "What?" And I would say, "It's Earth Day." He would just be like, "Stop it. Shut up. Stop it." In economic development news this week, Midtown Mall owner Dean Marcus spoke. Garbo speaks. At a hearing of the Worcester Redevelopment Authority yesterday, according to Nick Kotsopoulos of the Telegram and Gazette, he said he has plans to make improvements and that, quote, "We're dedicated to the city. We've worked very hard to establish something that is very unique for all of us. We have tried to create something worthwhile and special. I'm open to any new ideas that are productive and realistic." And he will try to submit an outline of a development plan to the WRA within the next 30 days as they are requesting. So this feels like some sort of slight change in this eternal story of the last decade around the Midtown Mall.
Has it been just a decade? I think it's 2.
It's been
a long time.
It may have been a century.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's
like, were you in Worcester?
Yeah.
You're familiar with Kim's, the jewelry store in there. They do like watches mostly.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with anything.
You've walked to the Midtown Mall probably more than anybody.
I've walked in the Midtown Mall, but I don't know anything.
You come in on the Front Street side?
I go in both sides.
Okay, but I'm telling you, if you were to come in the Front Street side,
Yes.
it's on your left. Because if I
Yes.
said you came in the other side, it would be on your right. So
Yes.
it's an important distinction. You come in on the Front Street side, on the left hand, one of the first stores,
Okay.
Kim's little watch.
Okay.
Were you here when they used to sell like knives and ninja equipment?
No, because I think I would have remembered him in that case.
First time, it's the second time now I've brought up ninjas in the show for no obvious reason. But that's one of my favorite childhood memories, unrelated to development in Worcester. That's Kim's. It was called Kim's. It used to be just like all they sold were knives and like nunchucks and Chinese stars and swords. And it was, you could go downtown with a pocket full of quarters to hit the arcade, and when you're done, pick up a couple throwing stars.
This seems to me more important than the question of can you buy socks in the city of Worcester is can you buy ninja paraphernalia in the city of
At the
Worcester?
Greendale Mall, you can, just like socks, Mike. This
well.
is the one thing that all of these naysayers who say we don't have retail, everything they need is at the Greendale Mall, still, even though there's only 2 stores.
Who is asking about whether or not you can buy socks?
I don't think we're going to say people's names, but I feel like what's his face? Dean Marcus. I mean, this is one of the things he said in his statement. Is he was like, people talk about how there's like no retail in the city of Worcester. Like, we are continue to be a source of retail for the city of Worcester. So maybe you should like respect that, Worcester WRA.
Well, maybe.
But there's plenty of retail in the city of Worcester. You know where you can buy socks, Grace? You can buy socks at Walgreens.
Oh, I know.
You can buy socks at Big Wall.
I was going to say you could buy socks in many places.
Yes.
I've easily found socks in the
Yes.
city limits.
Yes, you can buy socks, and I guess apparently also like throwing stars.
Throwing stars might be illegal. I'm not sure.
That doesn't
I
mean
think
you
it's
can't
like
buy
brass
them.
knuckles, where like for a while they were calling them brass paperweights, but
Uh-huh.
they didn't really fool anybody. So I think that you just don't find throwing stars and brass knuckles anymore. But swords, ninja swords.
A report from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston's New England Public Policy Center, which was looking at stats between 2011 and 2016 in Massachusetts, saw a slight reduction in the percentage of renters who are extremely low income, but also a reduction in the number of units affordable and available to those renters. So in 2011, we had 50.2 affordable and available units per 100 extremely low income households, but in 2016, we only had 48.6. In this case, affordable and available, it means that it exists, not that it's vacant.
Mm-hmm.
So both years we had basically half as many extremely low income units as we had people, and but the number went down a little bit. The number that we had per extremely low income people went down a little bit. Extremely low income in this case meaning below 30% of the area median income, and affordable, of course, meaning that you would spend 30% or less of your income on rent and utilities. If it's higher than that, you're rent burdened. I was actually looking this up. I think that many years I am rent burdened.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
I don't feel rent burdened.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a burden to me.
Maybe you just enjoy your space. more than most?
I don't know. They also found that in low rent areas, there are more rent-burdened people than in higher rent areas, and they take this to mean that the problem in those cases is low income rather than high rent. I really don't know how to think through this question as to understand what they're talking about in that case. By 2025, we're going to see about 9,000 units, which are currently occupied by ELI households, have their subsidies to expire, which would mean 3% less units in that ELI category. We in Worcester have 40,000 renter households. 34% of those households are extremely low income. 79% of our ELI households are rent burdened, and 61% are extremely rent burdened, meaning more than half of their income is going to rent. And Worcester does not look all that different than other big cities in Massachusetts. Boston is the only big city that's doing much better than average. They have 62% of the housing that their ELI households would need. And in some cities, there's like 10 or 20% of the ELI units are actual like market units. They're non-subsidized units. But in Worcester, I think there's like zero non-subsidized units that are affordable to an extremely low income household.
Zero?
It's either zero or they just let that part blank. I'm not sure.
Isn't that kind of weird about Boston too? Considering isn't that been like one of their Mayor Walsh's like primary agenda items since coming into office,
which
was increasing the amount of affordable housing because they basically say they have none.
Well, apparently he solved that problem 3 years ago.
Somebody should tell them that, because
he's doing better than Worcester. I mean, he's doing better than Worcester. I mean, like even if they're doing whatever, they're doing 60% as well as they need to, and we're doing whatever. We have like 20% as many as we need to, or something. 30% as many as we need to. So they're doing like a lot better than we are. Most cities are doing about as bad as we are in Massachusetts. Whatever you mean, and whatever you mean by bad too. Like I'm sensitive to this idea that like as you get more ELI appropriate housing, more people who are poor are going to come to your area because they're going to be like, well, I can rent a place in Worcester, so I'll move to Worcester. So to a certain extent, you can't just like solve the problem in Worcester without building a wall around the city and keeping people out.
Starting with the hole inside, and we're going to make them pay
that's
for
not
it.
Going to be a wall. That's going to be we're going to have like a Swiss style, booby trap landslide deal.
We could just have we could have a nice fence, like a chain link fence, as long as it was the every 20 or so feet there were towers with turrets on them.
I like this. I like this report about extremely low income housing. Like I don't know if either of you guys have any thoughts about this topic. Any additional thoughts?
Well, lots of thoughts, but those numbers are just confusing me.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment.
That the numbers are confusing you? Maybe you should read an article. Maybe you should read a report, "The Growing Shortage of Affordable Housing for the Extremely Low Income in Massachusetts," and here it is. Basically the top line statistic here is that we've got half as many in Massachusetts. Half the people who are really poor, can spend a reasonable amount of their income and still rent a place, even with subsidies and all the other stuff.
Right.
And that number, at least as of 3 years ago, for the last 5 years, that number had been going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I guess one of the thoughts that comes up, which is just a question that I have, is my perception is it's a lot harder for single adults because there's not a lot of housing for just individuals in Worcester that's affordable.
Right, like one bedroom or studio type stuff.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard that in my personal and professional life of people looking for housing on their own, feeling a lot more challenging than families, although families are certainly experiencing other pressures, which make it really hard.
We were talking about that last week quite a bit in terms of our local ordinances on, say, tenement housing and whatnot, that, taking a multifamily dwelling and allowing more, 4 unrelated people to live in the dwelling? It's a violation of city ordinance. It seems like one of those things that makes it really challenging to rent, say, like a bedroom, or rent something that people wouldn't necessarily be opposed to. And it doesn't have to be old school style like tenement housing, right, where we're just packing in hundreds of people into a floor of a building, which seems to be somebody's fear.
There's also some wacky laws about that in New York City specific to women, or at least there were when I was in college, because that was the reason we had no sororities on our campus, because technically they would have been designated as brothels.
That's I'm pretty sure we have the same thing here in Worcester, and I was just having this conversation with one of my employees not too long ago, who's a member of a sorority, and there is something similar that the reason they can't have parties and at their sororities. So
why are we not talking about this more?
It's only 2019. We have to wait till 2020 to talk. I don't know. Like it's one of those things. It's just silly. I mean, we were all sitting over in the corner as the two gentlemen before us from Worcester Magazine spent an hour trying to wrap their heads around the idea of how there are actual human beings alive who can't conceive of the notion of institutional racism, or that you shouldn't, in 2019, send emails, to school committee members trying to triangulate policy when you're not on the school committee. Like, yeah, I don't have answers to any of these questions, but they are questions that should be answered. But yeah, apparently you can't have parties if you're a sorority in Worcester because multiple unrelated women living in a house throwing a party somehow equates prostitution.
One thing I can tell you about housing, to shift back from some exciting stuff like prostitution back to less exciting stuff like housing, that the extremely low income household renting households category is older than the rental category as a whole. So it's like actually slightly older people who are more likely to be in this bind of like just not having the income to pay for housing. Yeah, which in some ways feels like. Yeah, I mean, this doesn't get into all the dynamics. Like, I don't know how much of this is just like people who are retired, seniors who are in this situation, which is not good, or how much of this is just like if it were an intergenerational trend, you could say, well, that's good insofar as that means that like as the current people get older, they'll remain kind of in a better income situation, and so like in some way this will just naturally not fix itself, but at least get a little bit better with time rather than continuing to get worse with time. But I don't understand to what extent it's.
Is there any hard numbers involved with that report?
So many hard numbers, dude. How many numbers?
Well, so like when you say that it's primarily something that the elderly are facing, right? Like, is there a number of elderly people who fit into that particular category?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this is one part that I'm flipping through trying to find. I can't.
Hey, Mike. While you look that up, can I use this as another opportunity to shamelessly redirect the conversation to the REC?
Sure.
It's relevant, I promise.
Are you guys growing housing like in gourds or something?
No, not yet.
Giant pumpkins.
But I just wanted to take an opportunity to shout out one of my favorite community partners, which is the Worcester Senior Center, which I think is one of the best senior centers in the state. We have our mobile farmers market that goes there. We've gone there in the summer for many years, but the last few years we've done a winter market at the senior center, and it's awesome. I highly recommend people, you don't have to be a senior to come visit it. But there is also a really amazing, beautiful community garden at the Worcester Senior Center, and part of what makes it so cool compared to the other gardens, I mean, they're all great. They're all beautiful. But the Senior Center Garden has gardeners from the Quinn Sigmund Community College Culinary Program, from the Division of Youth Opportunities Office, from the Arabic Elders Group, the Chinese Elders Group, as well as a couple of farmers from Cameroon who are kind of leading the charge. And they're all growing there, different techniques, different crops. It's really beautiful. So our mobile market season starts the week of June 17th. So wait until then. Go to the Worcester Senior Center, visit the REC Mobile Market, and check out the community garden.
Nice. Brendan?
Yeah, no, again, just thank you for that.
I'm just going to keep inserting these little interludes.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if, so regardless of how big or small that number is, right, it's still a problem. But I'm wondering if it's one of those things that it's a problem that, similar to how you just asked a moment ago, like, why is nobody talking about this? And, like, you just say to yourself, why is nobody solving that, right? Like, if it's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of elderly people within Worcester proper who are having difficulty with housing, like, that's something that we should probably have a task force to discuss.
I mean,
if it's 10, then it's like, okay, like, somebody, like, I'm going to City Hall now, and, like, we're just going to take care of this in the next hour. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But that's where I think the numbers become very important. The percentages are helpful in terms of a big picture story, in terms of comparison to other cities and towns.
Yeah.
But without those raw numbers, knowing what you're actually looking at for challenges within the community, I don't know how relevant they are.
Yeah, I didn't write them. I had the raw numbers on a different paper, but I didn't write them down.
You wrote them on a different report, Mike.
I wrote them on a different piece of paper.
And I'm sure they are big numbers, right? Otherwise, we probably would have dealt with it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, so, okay, I can tell you this. I can't tell you about elderly people. I can tell you that we have 40,000 households that are renters, and a third of those are in this extremely low income situation.
40,000.
So that means like whatever. Like,
so of that 34% that are extremely low income, do you know which percentage of them are rent burdened?
79%.
So 79% of the low-income population are rent-burdened, or 79% overall?
Of ELI households. 79% of ELI. So we have, so I'm just doing back of the envelope. So 34% of 40,000 are ELI, and 80% of ELI are rent-burdened. And 61% of them actually are severely rent-burdened, meaning they're more than 50% is going to rent.
It's like 7,000 people.
Yeah, it is like seven. Yeah, so like we have like 13,000 people who are in this ELI category, right? And like somewhere like 7 to 10,000 of them are like in these categories of
that feels task force worthy.
It does, but at the same time, it's still not a huge number, right? Like if it's a number that grows, you know, like if it's a number that like would potentially get bigger over time and become problematic, like so.
Sorry, I'm just going to interject with a very small anecdote unrelated to the REC.
Yes.
I was in Ireland a couple years ago visiting family with my son, and they had something on the radio where they were talking about the problem of homelessness in Ireland, and apparently the total homeless population of the entire country was some number that I don't remember, but it was definitely less than 10,000.
Yeah.
All those people left during the potato famine.
Yeah,
There's
but
like nobody in that
I was like, oh,
country
you
anymore.
could solve homelessness in your entire country.
Right.
With a relatively small amount of money.
Well, I don't think
it was mind-blowing to me.
I don't think it's the case anymore, but again, something we used to not really joke about, but reference all the time. There was a moment in U.S. history, not too long ago, around the time of the economic collapse, that our what we had for vacant housing in the United States was significantly, like an order of magnitude larger than the homeless population. And of course, there are a million other things that come into play in terms of services and whatnot. But I used to always say to Mike, like, if we're going to use the label homelessness, right, then like we've decided as a society that that's the primary problem, the lack of home, right? And like, but here we are because the Realtors Association and the the Real Estate Brokers Associations are the biggest lobbyists in the United States.
But also, you know, those vacancies weren't where the homeless people are. Like the homeless population of San Francisco, in California.
Totally, 100% true. But that's also something too that I think is you mentioned, right? Like, which I think is still kind of a fear that people have, Mike. That's irrational, but it's still a fear that, well, if we do a great job with housing and providing housing in Worcester, everyone's going to come running here, right? Like, so
I don't think that that's irrational.
It's completely irrational.
You can say fear's irrational. I mean, fear is the mind killer after all.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you can say that that's irrational as a part of how you think about the issue. That like if you have if you make a lot more affordable housing available in Worcester, there's absolutely people in other cities who will move to Worcester.
But you know for a fact that it's not true.
I know for a fact that it is true.
No, you know.
Why do I know for a fact that it's not
because
true?
Because you're from a part of the country where unemployment is still relatively high as a region.
Yeah.
While we're at the lowest level of unemployment as a nation, and since World War II, if what you're saying is true, everybody that grew up in your neighborhood would have picked up and moved where the jobs are, right?
Oh, no. I mean, there's obviously lots of reasons that people don't just move. I mean, this is actually a very significant problem in West Virginia, that there's whole counties in West Virginia where there's just not work, and people don't move because of all the reasons that people don't want to move from where they live.
Totally.
But
we have a surplus of 7 million jobs in the United States and 3% unemployment, but we know it's not as simple as just uprooting and disappearing, which is my point.
Sure. I mean, we saw this natural experiment.
You painted a horrifying picture of like 290 full of elderly people on walkers just parading into Worcester like zombies because we did a good job with affordable housing.
But to be fair, you painted an unrealistically sunny picture of us just shipping homeless people from the places where there's no vacant housing.
I was following up your comment about Ireland, that from a strict numbers perspective, like Ireland has a lot more complex problems. It's not a very big country, but yes, relative to the population, 10,000 homeless people is still huge because the population of Ireland is what? I remember it's not.
And I don't know if it's 10. It was less than 10, but I don't know what it was.
Yeah, but I mean, but the population of the country is less than many of our states.
Yes.
Right. So I mean, it's still a huge number by relative, which is kind of the conversation we're having overall here. That if all we have is the percentages, that's meaningless without knowing what that percentage is relative to the population as a whole.
It is. I mean, and so I feel like one of the reasons that I run my own numbers sometimes on these is because I try to find helpful information.
Yeah.
Like I could tell you, for example, that in this report says that, I don't know what, the federal government gives us $1 billion on this issue, or we need $1 billion to fix this issue if all these affordable housing units expire or whatever. But it's like $1 billion compared to what? Mm-hmm. The report doesn't give me that, and I didn't spend the time to do that, which is why I don't want to talk about that particular number, because it's like, again, it's like compared to what? It's not helpful to just have that in isolation. We don't need to keep arguing about whether people in Worcester would move here if housing were cheaper. I just want to make it clear that I'm not conceding this point. That
there are also a lot of other great reasons why people will move to Worcester.
There's a ton of reasons to move to Worcester. I think it's interesting, though, that people are moving here as it's getting more expensive, conceivably, which is, our population is actually increasing only in the period of time, and in my lifetime, that our cost of living has increased relative to
yes
what our earnings potential within city limits.
I wanted to say something. Grace, I don't know if you knew this, but Brent crude oil is $70 a barrel, up 2% on the week. Bitcoin is $5,000, up 22%
Crazy
on the
week.
week.
We slept last week.
31% on the month, and down only 24% on the year. I Googled this, what is up with Bitcoin, and all I got was some articles that didn't tell me what was up with Bitcoin.
Yeah, you're not going to learn what's up with Bitcoin because I don't think anyone has any
Somebody
idea.
just made a beeping noise because they texted us an article about homelessness in Ireland.
Thank you.
Something you would legitimately be excited to know. I always tell Brendan this information, Grace, in some weeks I think he's happy to hear it, in some weeks he
hopefully they're not texting me being like, Grace is way off.
No, Grace is doing a great job. Grace, I'll tell you this, and Brendan will be excited. The producer price index for construction sand,
yes,
gravel, and crushed stone for February was 344.2, down almost 1% on the month, but up 1.5% since last October, which was when the last definitive quarterly producer price index for gravel was put out there by the St. Louis Fed, I believe, who calculates this statistic.
Good on them.
This is great news.
I get stuck behind a local rock and gravel family dynasty Sanssouci stone the other day. I got stuck behind one of their trucks. It was a nightmare.
This is one of these areas of the economy that I'm completely divorced from, but apparently there is some sort of a shortage of gravel in the world,
which is really weird to think about.
Which is apparently absolutely true. And there's places in Massachusetts where people do illegal gravel mining and then try to fill it in with other stuff so that they're not shown to be doing illegal gravel mining.
And some of our coolest swimming holes throughout New England are like old quarries and whatnot. It's really just, it's not only just, I
don't even know where gravel comes from, honestly.
Your shoe.
My son Theo's favorite song is a song about dump trucks, and one of the verses is, so what does it carry? Anything that's heavy? Yes. Lots of tiny pebbles, thousands of tiny pebbles. I just thought I'd bring that up.
Which is to say gravel.
Yes. Precious gravel.
The Telegram and Gazette reports that the state is funding 3 new residential programs in Worcester for people with mental illness or drug addiction problems. They are Living in Freedom Together, which is a program by and for people who've survived the sex trade, Veterans Inc., Our Vet Shelter, and Washburn House, which focuses on addiction recovery. So I just bring that up because we always like to talk about addiction on this program. Mm-hmm. Speaking of addiction, I wanted to just bring this up. I mentioned this in a past episode, but we didn't really talk about it. This article, Against Rat Park by Scott Alexander.
Mike hates Rat Park. I haven't been following along this conversation.
Yeah. Something that I really want to be true is the Rat Park model, or the Rat Park model of addiction. And I'll read Scott's opening paragraph because he states this clearly. Rat Park is a famous study in which lab rats were kept in a really nice habitat that satisfied their every need. Contrary to the usual results with lab animals, scientists couldn't get these happier rats addicted to drugs. Researchers concluded that drug addiction, far from being the simple biological story everyone assumed it was really just a coping mechanism for intolerable social situations. Rats stuck in terrible cages get addicted to drugs, as do humans in terrible slums, but give them other opportunities for happiness and the problem disappears. And Scott then proceeds to just sort of look at a lot of sort of common sense anecdotal situations. For example, he looks at Genghis Khan's son and grandson who were terrible alcoholics and died young deaths from that. He looks at people who ran away from European settlements in the United States and then moved to Indian villages or were kidnapped by the Indians and stuck around with the Indians. And these people almost always said way better lifestyle than the colonial lifestyle. Just living in the woods, hunting some deer and whatever, way cooler. And yet, of course, American Indians famously had huge problems with alcoholism. And he says, can you invent some convoluted definition of flourishing which classifies stormtroopers, chronic pain patients, and enriched environment rats as flourishing, but cons, Indians, and celebrities as deprived? Maybe, but by that point, the Rat Park hypothesis is becoming unfalsifiable. Any seemingly flourishing group that becomes addicted will just lead to more twists in the definition of flourishing. Better to just admit people can succumb to addiction no matter what their apparent happiness level. In his next section, he starts off by saying, a more responsible look at addiction would emphasize that it's at least half genetic. So I just think this is interesting, Brendan, because, I mean, there is this sort of takeaway from Rat Park, which is that addiction is mostly an environmental problem, right?
I don't know that mostly, but that it's something that we shouldn't just write off completely, like most of the addiction treatment industry has since the founding of AA.
Which is that it's partially
treating it only as biological, and that it can only be or as a failing, right? Yeah. Like there's never been the exploration that like you finish. I'm sorry.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, I mean, I think that he also goes on to say that obviously, I think we all intuitively know that, you know, people tend to, if you're going to relapse, you're going to relapse on a bad day rather than on a happy day.
Yeah,
like, that's generally how it goes. That, you know, like if suddenly you win the lottery and things are happier, not everybody's going to get sober from that, but a lot of people are going to get sober from that more than they are when their mom dies and they get cancer.
See, that was my whole problem with his. I've read that piece before too.
Right.
So the way he categorizes happiness to me is, like, frankly bizarre, right? Mm-hmm. Like, to me that reads like somebody who's never met a wealthy person or never met a famous person and actually believes in the weird, like, American mythology that, you know, if you're popular, like, you're automatically happy.
It can be very stressful.
To say that, like, the child of, like, Genghis Khan, like, arguably the most powerful but also, like, one of the worst humans ever, mm-hmm. is just by default going to be happy because he was born into wealth and privilege is absurd. And, like, all you're acknowledging is that you've never met somebody who's been born into power if you just think that's where happiness terminates. If, like, similarly, if you're talking about a celebrity, like, have you never met a famous person? Most of them are pretty miserable. Like, that's not what they dreamed they were getting into, but they've gone down a path that they can't just walk away from.
Well, anyway, I mean, I appreciate his point that we should continue to think of addiction as having at least a substantial genetic component, and that, like,
absolutely.
Again, like, that basically this is not saying that, like, the Rat Park idea is all lies. It's just saying maybe we should think that the Rat Park part of it is a third of the deal or a quarter of the deal.
I say picking the numbers where it gets weird, though, Mike, because that's the bigger problem is within the addiction treatment industry.
Yes.
There's no acknowledgement of the park. Joy is not even something that comes into the conversation.
Yes.
You won't even get somebody in that industry to acknowledge that 70% of people with opioid addictions have at least one experience with severe childhood trauma behind them. Mm-hmm. Won't acknowledge that, because that's the stuff you deal with afterwards. Right now, we're just going to deal with the biological aspects of addiction, which it seems like a completely broken way of going about things.
So, I actually have I have very minimal experience of the addiction treatment industry, and you have plenty of professional experience.
What you just read sums it all up. That, like, we're going to treat individuals like we're all the same, right? And whether you're doing that from a biological perspective or you're doing it from a more holistic perspective, you're missing the point entirely. You and I, our opioid receptors are not the same, our cannabinoid receptors are not the same, the way we deal with alcohol is not the same. So trying to compare the two of us misses the point completely when it comes to the way we're going to.
And isn't the whole study set up for failure? Because it's obviously sort of framed to get the more biological response because the brains of rats are not very complex.
Sure.
And so you're sort of limiting your results of what could be the factors that are impacting addiction by your choice of subject matter.
Completely.
These tiny-brained rodents. We're not rats.
We're not rats. And I guess anytime I've ever read anything of substance about a researcher behind the Rat Park model, it's not suggesting that there's one form of happiness, that if you just sell that to somebody, addiction will go away. It's like, for me, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I'm going to take my phone, I'm going to throw it in a pond, my wife and I are going to get into a van, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life traveling around the country, mountain biking, snowboarding, surfing, and practicing jiu-jitsu. That's what I'm going to do. Like, for me, that would be a little bit of yoga and a little bit of meditation as well. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the high water of happiness. I'm not going to have time to get messed up because my clock is going to be so full. My calendar is going to be so full just doing the things that I'm truly passionate about. There's no work involved because those things are work for me. And I think that's where you and I have had this conversation before, is I know you do lean heavy on the idea that there is value in the structure that comes into play with, like, work, what social norms around what people will find fulfilling. I think those are all, that's the ludicrous part. Is you and I, aliens would view us as literally as the exact same person right now. They'd confuse us, right? We look so similar, and we talk similar, we hold very similar beliefs.
We've got gray beards.
But just that little slice of life alone is enough to separate us completely in terms of what we put value in for where we find joy and happiness. Yes. And I think that's the important part. If we want to be happy rats, we need to talk to the rats, get down low, listen to them, whisper in their little rat ears and say, what's going to make you happy today? Maybe it's just running on a wheel. Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, my key takeaway from this study that I've only just now heard of today is that it's easier for people to deal with problems when they're not worried about their basic needs. And I think that could be applied to almost any kind of problem.
Yes, although the rat park thing in particular is like, they're not like starving one. I think they're not, the idea is that you're not starving one group of rats. It's just that one group of rats are like sitting by themselves in a cage, and the other group of rats are in like a rat park. They have like other rats hanging around. They got little wheels to play in.
Lots of
like
rat sex. There was like everything a rat could want.
It's like a social thing. So frequently it's argued that like the way to help a particular addict is to say, if we can get your social situation straightened out, or we can get your social situation above a certain threshold, then you're much like a rat. You're just not going to be interested in getting a high at all. And I think
that's crazy, but of course it's going to help.
Right, but I guess I have seen the rat park thing presented as a much less nuanced version than Brendan, for example, is talking about. And this is why I bring this up. Like I said, Scott Alexander here is saying like, well, of course this is a component of it. But again, it's like frequently, to me, I've seen it frequently presented as being like, this is the silver bullet of addiction, bro, guys. And I think Scott's just saying, not really.
Well, so I think the most important part of that piece that you're reading from is actually the last sentence, because he finishes it with something that I agree with completely. Increase in access to therapy, Suboxone, and further research in hallucinogens are the most important aspects of addiction treatment right now.
Yes.
You would find almost no researcher in addiction treatment who would argue that. But within the addiction treatment community as a profession, you're going to find lots of hostility, especially to that last one. You know, just like legalization of weed, there is no organization that's pushing harder to keep states like Oregon, who's working on legalizing mushrooms this year for psychotherapy, especially addiction and PTSD. It's the addiction treatment industry that doesn't want to see that happen, because now the people are starting to move in on their territory that they've held a monopoly on for a very, very long time. Literally since the founding of AA, nobody's been able to move in on that territory. Some stuff is happening in the research community. A lot of the folks from MAPS, who are actually big proponents of using hallucinogens in particular for treatment, as treatment for addiction, which has been done successfully in the past. That's why we have AA, is due to experiences with LSD from one of its founders. They don't want to see that change happen, because those are all the things that were removed out of the treatment protocols over the years, and it's only been a focus on medicated assisted treatment, where there's a ton of money that comes into that, and it's a long-term process, as opposed to really, really good therapy, treating somebody like a human being, where joy and happiness does come into play, as well as more short-term treatments that have shown a much higher rate of return than what we've relied upon for the last 70 years or so.
Brendan and Grace, I promised you a great secret, Gabby also, and I will not disappoint you. Is this the end of our adventure? Nothing has an end. We came here in search of the secret of immortality, to be like gods, and here we are, mortals, more human than ever. If we have not obtained immortality, at least we have obtained reality. We began in a fairy tale, and we came to life. But is this life reality? No. It is a podcast. Zoom back camera. We are images, dreams, photographs. We must not stay here prisoners. We shall break this illusion, this Maya. Goodbye to the holy mountain. Real life awaits us. We'll talk to you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Oh, that was awesome.